This is a story, folks, that so far has been broken by the Daily Mail and picked up by the New York Post. It seems the Daily Mail, according to their source, Michelle Obama, to get a check for $741,000 for a 1-hour speech about diversity and inclusion at the Munich conference. The former First Lady will be paid 700,000 euros for her appearance at the Bits and Pretzels Founder Festival. Organizers said Obama had topped the list of people that participants wanted to take part year after year. Her husband, former President Barack Obama, had also previously spoken at the festival in 2019. Michelle Obama raked in nearly $750,000 for a 1-hour speech at a tech fair in southern German city of Munich on Monday, DailyMail.com has learned. The 59-year-old picked up the eye-watering check for speaking to a startup event held on the sidelines of the annual Oktoberfest Beer Festival, two sources close to the conference organizers said. According to the event's webpage, the ex-attorney was set to speak to some 5,000 attendees on how to push past self-doubt while discussing the importance of inclusivity and diversity. The Harvard graduate will be paid 700,000 euros for her appearance at the 3-day Love-In for European Entrepreneurs, which is the rough equivalent of $741,000. They really pulled out all the stops to get her, said one person close to the team behind the annual Bits and Pretzels Forum. It's one of the highest fees they have ever paid. That sum is nearly double what Biden earns in a year as president. And by the way, folks, I will just make mention because this stat is fresh in our heads because we just did a segment on the poverty rate increasing last year. Not only did the poverty rate increase this year, but the median income decreased by $2,000 to now about $74,000. So her 1-hour speech on diversity and inclusion netted her 10 times what the median earner earns here at home in 1 year for a 1-hour speech. Axios previously reported that Michelle Obama could be booked for $200,000 while her husband costs $400,000. Those are the usual fees. Her fellow speakers include Oliver Kahn, a former German soccer star turned entrepreneur. The Bits and Pretzels conference is set over 3 days and hears from founders of national and international companies that tell their success stories, as well as guest speakers like Michelle Obama. So, we did the story on Ibram X. Kendi last time, where, his grift, his diversity grift was exposed for what it is. How can anybody, let's say the report is wrong. Let's say it's half that. Let's say it's $200,000. And I don't think it is because there were two sources that confirmed this to the Daily Mail. They also reached out for comment from Michelle's team and did not hear anything back. You'd think this would be something they would deny if the number were wrong. The fact that they feel confident enough putting that out tells me it's almost certainly accurate. $741,000 for a 1-hour lecture, and you still have people believing that the Obamas are on their side, that the Obamas are, all for the empowerment of the ordinary person. It's just what an obscene slap in the face. It's just so unbelievably pathetic.
Yeah, well, it's to modify the old saying, if they didn't have identity politics, they'd have to invent it. All of this, when you look at this, and I've never heard of this particular festival, but it sounds like it's one of those, satellite Davos things like the Aspen Institute and South by Southwest. It's all that, tech bro, we're changing the world and we're doing good by doing well and all the shit that Gira DeHartis gets into in Winners Take All. It's this whole circle jerk of ridiculously rich people telling themselves that they're saving the world by being rapacious entrepreneurs. And they need people like Michelle Obama to make that grift convincing, even for themselves, right? Here's this very, prominent, not white, that's the important part, and female, I mean, that's the whole thing, person who's basically co-signing our worldview, co-signing our project. A lot of this is going to sound a little bit like a left turn, but it's actually related. A lot of what people have been discussing in the course of this entertainment strike, it's really kind of brought to the surface. Part of the reason the public has almost had a certain schadenfreude about the strike rather than any support for it is, so much of what's come out of Hollywood is seen to just hate at least half the country, right? It's been this very activist kind of thing, particularly at Disney, which bothers people a lot because they are the holders of the legacy of so many cultural touchstones at this point. Through acquisitions, they've almost bought up our entire cultural legacy. This is a result of what Gerrit Hardis talks about, that this whole thing is a part of. You have a whole generation that got taught at schools, particularly elite schools, that the way to change the world was not to go into politics or social work. It was to go inside these corporations that actually run things,
right,
and be activists within these corporations. So they went to places, they went to Hollywood, among other places, and when you hand them Snow White, they're not going to do Snow White. That's not what they're there for, right? They're there to change America through this corporate structure. So they're going to do this, completely revisionist thing. That's what Michelle Obama is there to represent and to justify and to promote. This understanding of change as being purely limited to shuffling around the identity groups. I know some people inside that corporate world and, who are not, white. And like their view is really limited to the idea that you need to diversify these corporations. You need to diversify the executives, and you need to, have more diversity. There is no critique of capitalism amongst that class, amongst these people. Like when you talk to diverse people who are working within these corporations, it's very much with that activist mindset, but that activism has been purely channeled into the idea that you just have to diversify the people who manage capitalism. That's the only problem, because that's what their schools have taught them to limit their concept of activism to. There is no class critique. There is no economic critique. That's what Michelle Obama represents, and something that and that's what the Obamas represent generally. I would argue she sells it better. I would argue she's more likable than he is. She's very charming, right? She's very warm. Seems very approachable. I would argue she's more likable in that role than he is. It's a little depressing because with Michelle Obama, I mean, this is true with Barack too. It seems like people really don't understand any of that about who she is and where she's coming from. And that's what makes her such an effective spokesmodel for the Aspen Institute understanding of philanthropy and the proper order of the world, because she's good at it. She's really good at it. In that article, it talks about how popular she is. What is it, like 15% of people don't like her?
Yeah, she's got like a 77% overall favorability rating, which is why I mean, that was the other thing. That's what made that Morning Joe segment so ridiculous. Oh, yeah, Kamala Harris is not popular because she's a black woman. Yeah, that's why Michelle has a 77% approval rating and Biden's at 39. You know what I mean? That's what makes that so insane. But you mentioned how, they have an understanding of change that is viewed through this lens, and that's absolutely a huge part of it. Another part of it, though, goes beyond just an understanding of change. They undergo this redefining of process. So what I mean by that is a re-explaining or this sort of alternate theory to how change is actually brought about. Change is not brought about through strong moral statements, brief and very clear moral statements, such as Martin Luther King, not judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. That says everything you have to say about diversity and inclusion. Schmuck that he was, he put it in 15 words. What's that worth? About 65 cents? No, you got to fill an hour, baby. That's how you get 741 grand. You need to be able to fill an hour 100 times. You give 100 speeches for 700 grand a pop, now you're in the money. This guy goes out there for free, mind you, and says people need to be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. There's no money in that. There's no money in that because guys like Martin Luther King were for real, and people like the Obamas are full of shit, Martha's Vineyard dwelling phonies. And so that's the big difference. And that's why it's not just that their understanding of change has sort of evolved very conveniently for them, but it's the way they articulate political progress. It's their vision of progress as something very, very intellectualized, right? To the point where it takes years and years and years to understand and wrap your head around and process, right? The whole thing is a giant filibuster because they have to create, just like Ibram X. Kendi creates fields of study for himself to master and then propagate. Right. You know, the Obamas, what Obama always throughout his tenure insisted that progress was slow, right? It's an imperfect country and progress is slow. Well, that's very convenient for you, right? Because what does that mean? It means you're creating an unsolvable problem. And there's a lot of money in trying to solve unsolvable problems because solving unsolvable problems takes a lot of time, right? Martin Luther King moved very, very quickly, was very, very effective, didn't make a whole lot of money, and of course, things didn't end well for him either, right? So that's how you tell who's for real and who's not.
Please clap.